lot of folks I meet with, they come from the Buddhist tradition. And if you look at the teachings of the Buddha, he did everything by himself. He did it on his own. He even talks about, that it's very important for you to figure this out on your own. But what people forget about that is that the Buddha had many, many teachers. And he had great teachers who taught him all different types of things about the path of spirituality. He lived with his teachers. And, so if something came up within him, he could get feedback right away. And so a lot of people, they come to me and they have this sense that they're supposed to figure it out all on their own, like the Buddha figured out everything by himself. And I think there's a confusion and an arrogance in that. The confusion is that, one, that's how the Buddha did it. And two, the arrogance is that I can figure this all out by myself. But for me, I was always fortunate to have incredible teachers. I met my teacher when I was 19 years old, and I basically spent 20 years with him, working for him almost 40 hours a week, And so I spent an incredible amount of time with him. So anytime I had a struggle or a question in my life, or if I was having a spiritual experience that didn't make sense, I could sit down and talk with him. And he could help guide me, in a sense, back to the truth. Because I think so many of us, we just think that, I can figure this out, but life is difficult, it's confusing, hell, being a human in this world is, we can have a train wreck, a couple times a year. You know what I mean? Yeah, we can really struggle, and so it's really helpful to have someone a little bit further down the path than us, someone with a clear mind that we can ask them questions, that we can share what our experience is. And the job of the teacher is not necessarily tell someone exactly how to do it, but just to gently invite them to perhaps look at it a different way, from a broader perspective, a more inclusive perspective. A perspective that includes, both the clarity of the mind and the loving nature of their heart. And, so it's quite beneficial to have someone on the path to help, to guide you a certain way, to maybe challenge you about what your next step is. One of my passions as a teacher is to point out shadows, in an individual. And the reason that, I get a lot of good feedback about my ability to point out shadows is because I've discovered so many different shadows within my own consciousness. These blind spots that we have. And so to me, I've always wanted to know, what is the full picture? And if we're going to look and see and experience life from the full picture, that means we must also be willing to look at the places where we have our blinders on. The places where we've been hurt, where we've been wounded, where we're struggling, where perhaps we have arrogance or pride or selfishness or, some kind of victim mentality. Or, some people, they know a great philosophy, but they don't know it truly in their experience. And so a teacher, one of the jobs of the teacher is to point that out and say, hey, do you really know that in your direct experience? You may know it in your mind, and it may make perfect sense in your rational description. But do you know it in your direct experience? And so these are powerful things. Also, a very important job of the teacher, and this is something that's not spoken about much, is part of the teacher's job is to transmit a greater level of grace and awakening in the student. To transmit what the next step is. To transmit new realities to the student. And so that's one of the graces that I had in my interactions with my teachers, was that they were such powerful transmitters. and that I could sit down with them and they could open new worlds within me. And then when I opened up to those new worlds, then I could begin to plant roots there. And that new world became part of my consciousness. And so this is a powerful thing that can occur with this relationship with the student and the teacher. And I think just as human beings, it's always good to remember that, yes, we have this relative relationship with the student and the teacher in form, but all of us, no matter how awake or enlightened we may think we are, we have this greater teacher, the greater teacher of life, which we must bow before, and this greater teacher of God. And we must, always be humble in our relationship with that. If we don't, we'll get ourselves in all kinds of trouble. It's good to know who the ultimate boss is.